What if the thing you're fighting so hard to escape is the very thing shaping who you're becoming? Every year, we promise ourselves change, more discipline, more peace, less struggle. Yet somehow, the challenges return different faces, same weight on the chest. What if the problem was never the year ahead, but the way we've been walking through our lives all along? There is a moment quiet, almost invisible, when resistance turns into exhaustion, when control turns into fear, and when striving no longer brings relief. That moment is where this story begins. Not with answers, but with a truth most people never slow down long enough to hear. Stay with me, because by the end of this journey, you may realize the strength you've been searching for was never missing at all. If this message resonates with you, subscribe to Buddhism in every moment to support the channel and help us continue creating deep, meaningful videos like this, videos that don't just inspire for a moment, but stay with you long after the screen goes dark. Your presence here matters. The new year doesn't arrive with fireworks in the soul. It arrives quietly, often when no one is watching. It shows up in the space between one breath and the next. In the moment just before you reach for your phone in the morning. In the second before your mind starts listing everything you need to fix about yourself. We are told this is the season of momentum, of ambition, of becoming someone better, faster, stronger, more disciplined than we were before. But what if the most powerful thing you could do at the start of a new year is not to move forward at all? What if real discipline begins not with effort, but with stopping? Most people don't pause. They can't. Life has trained them not to. The calendar flips, and immediately the pressure begins. New goals, new routines, new expectations. A quiet panic underneath it all, the fear of falling behind, of wasting time, of not becoming enough. So they rush. They fill the silence with noise. They replace reflection with productivity. And in doing so, they miss the only place where real change can begin. Because discipline, in its deepest sense, is not about forcing yourself to do more. It is about having the courage to look honestly at where you already are. Before the Buddha ever spoke of peace, he spoke of seeing clearly. Before transformation, there was stillness. Before the path, there was awareness of the ground beneath one's feet. You cannot choose a direction if you refuse to acknowledge your location. Yet this is what most of us do every January. We plan the future without meeting the present. We set intentions without understanding the habits that already run our lives. We promise change without first listening to the quiet truths we've been avoiding. There is a kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from doing too much. It comes from never stopping long enough to feel what you're carrying. You can see it everywhere. In a crowded subway platform in New York, on a cold January morning, faces moving forward, bodies in motion, eyes empty, minds somewhere else. In the quiet glow of office buildings, before sunrise lights on, laptops open, hearts already tired before the day has even begun. In the way people say, "I just need to get through this year," as if life is something to survive rather than inhabit. This exhaustion is not a personal failure. It is a collective habit. We have learned to confuse motion with meaning, speed with progress, control with discipline. But discipline, in the Buddhist sense, does not begin by tightening your grip on life. It begins by noticing how tightly you are already holding on. The pause is where this noticing happens. It is uncomfortable. It strips away distractions. It removes the stories you tell yourself about being busy or driven or on track. In the pause, there is nowhere to hide. You start to feel what the noise was covering. The subtle anxiety beneath your routines. The dissatisfaction you've normalized. The quiet grief of a life lived on autopilot. This is why people avoid stopping. Not because they are lazy, but because they are afraid of what they might see. Yet the Buddha taught that nothing truly liberating begins with avoidance. Freedom begins with willingness, the willingness to sit with reality exactly as it is, without judgment, without escape. To pause is to say, I am here. This is where I stand. This is what my life feels like right now. No fixing, no resolving, no improving, just seeing. And there is something radical about that. Because when you stop running from your own experience, something unexpected happens. The tension softens. The inner resistance loosens. You realize that much of your suffering was not caused by your circumstances, but by the constant effort to outrun them. This is the hidden doorway into discipline. Not the discipline of harsh routines or rigid control, but the discipline of presence. The discipline to stay. The discipline to listen. The discipline to resist the urge to immediately change what you haven't yet understood. In this sense, the pause is not passive. It is an act of courage. It takes strength to sit still in a culture addicted to acceleration. It takes honesty to admit you don't yet know where you're going. It takes humility to recognize that your old ways of pushing may be the very reason you feel lost. The new year does not ask you to become someone else overnight. It asks you to be awake enough to notice the life already unfolding within you. Before discipline becomes action, it must become awareness. Before peace becomes something you cultivate, it must become something you stop chasing. Before challenges are overcome, they must be met without resistance. This is the beginning, not a resolution, not a reinvention, but a pause deep enough to hear the truth beneath the noise. And if you can stay here just a little longer, everything that follows will arise from a place of clarity rather than desperation. The path does not begin with movement. It begins with stillness. Most people flinch when they hear the word discipline. Something tight forms in the chest, a memory of pressure, of being controlled, of failing to keep promises to themselves and feeling quietly ashamed afterward. In the modern mind, discipline has become synonymous with punishment, force, deprivation, a rigid voice saying, try harder, even when the soul is already exhausted. But this understanding is not only incomplete, it is deeply harmful. Because true discipline, as the Buddha taught it, was never meant to break you. It was meant to protect you. Not from the world, but from the slow erosion that happens when your inner life has no boundaries. Look closely at how most suffering unfolds today. It rarely arrives as a dramatic collapse. It seeps in quietly, through constant availability, through endless notifications, through the subtle pressure to always respond, always perform, always be reachable. There is no villain here, just a life with no edges. When everything has access to you, something essential is lost. Your attention fragments. Your energy leaks. Your mind becomes a crowded room where no one is truly listening. Discipline, in its original sense, is the act of choosing what you allow into that room. It is not about controlling your behavior, it is about safeguarding your inner clarity. Think of discipline not as a clenched fist, but as a door. Not slammed shut, but intentionally closed when needed. A door that says, this is where my energy ends. This is where my attention rests. This is what I will no longer sacrifice for noise. Without this door, even the strongest intentions dissolve. You may want peace, but your habits invite chaos. You may crave presence, but your days are structured for distraction. You may long for meaning, but your time is given away to what never truly nourishes you. This is not a moral failure. It is a design problem. And discipline is the redesign. The Buddha spoke of ethical discipline not as a list of rules, but as a form of refuge. A place the mind can rest without fear of its own impulses. When your actions are aligned, something profound happens inside you. There is less internal negotiation, less guilt, less second-guessing. You no longer have to convince yourself who you are each day. Your life speaks for you. This is the quiet power of discipline. It removes the constant friction between intention and action. Consider how exhausting it is to live without it. You wake up already behind. Your phone dictates the tone of your morning. Your attention is pulled in a dozen directions before you've even checked in with yourself. By nightfall, you are drained not because you did too much, but because you decided nothing deliberately. Undisciplined living is not freedom. It is a subtle form of captivity. You are not choosing, you are reacting. True discipline reverses this dynamic. It restores authorship. When you decide consciously that certain things no longer deserve unlimited access to you, something inside relaxes. Your nervous system feels it first. Then your thoughts slow. Then your choices become cleaner. This is why discipline feels restrictive at first. It interrupts patterns that once ran unchecked. But over time, it reveals itself as spaciousness. You no longer waste energy resisting your own excess. You no longer fight yourself every morning. You no longer make promises you secretly expect to break. Instead, there is trust between you and yourself, and that trust becomes the soil from which peace grows. This is why discipline must be reimagined, not as self-domination, but as self-respect made visible. It is saying my life is too valuable to be lived unconsciously. My mind is too precious to be left unguarded. My peace matters enough to protect. When discipline arises from this place, it does not feel heavy. It feels grounding. It does not shrink your life. It gives it shape, and shape is what allows something beautiful to endure. The new year does not ask you to control yourself more harshly. It asks you to care enough about your inner world to protect it. That is where discipline truly begins. There is a kind of suffering that doesn't announce itself with crisis or collapse. It doesn't arrive as heartbreak, loss, or tragedy. It arrives quietly, so quietly that most people never name it at all. It is the suffering of a life slowly drifting off course. An undisciplined life does not usually fall apart in a single moment. It erodes, one small choice at a time, one skipped pause, one ignored boundary, one promise to start tomorrow. And because nothing dramatic happens, it feels harmless, manageable, normal. Until one day, you wake up tired in a way sleep cannot fix. This is the quiet cost no one warns you about. You begin your mornings already mentally behind, carrying a low-grade anxiety you can't trace to any single problem. Your days feel full, yet strangely empty. You stay busy, yet disconnected. Accomplished, yet unsatisfied. Nothing is technically wrong. And that is what makes it so unsettling. The Buddha understood this kind of suffering deeply. He taught that most pain does not come from what happens to us, but from the patterns we live inside without awareness. An undisciplined life is not chaotic on the surface. It is chaotic underneath. Your attention is constantly borrowed. Your energy is fragmented. Your inner compass is dulled by constant reaction. You do not feel in danger, but you no longer feel grounded. This is what happens when effort has no direction. Without discipline, effort turns into striving. Striving turns into pressure. Pressure turns into quiet resentment toward your life, your obligations, even yourself. You keep pushing, not because you know where you're going, but because stopping feels frightening. So you scroll a little longer, work a little later, distract yourself a little more. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, your life begins to feel like something that's happening to you rather than something you're participating in. This is not laziness. It is exhaustion without alignment. The Buddha spoke of right effort, not as relentless striving, but as energy applied wisely. Energy that knows when to engage and when to rest. When to move forward and when to stop feeding what causes harm. An undisciplined life wastes energy, not because it does too little, but because it does too much of what doesn't matter. You can feel this when you look honestly. the conversations you didn't need to have, the information you didn't need to consume, the obligations you accepted without asking why. Each one seems insignificant. Together, they drain something essential. Over time, the cost shows up emotionally. You feel irritable without cause, unmotivated despite opportunity, disconnected even when surrounded by people. You may begin to believe something is wrong with you. But often, nothing is wrong with you at all. What's missing is containment. Without discipline, your life has no rhythm, no intentional flow, no space for your inner world to settle. And when the mind has no structure, it creates suffering for itself. This is why the Buddha taught discipline as a foundation, not a restriction. Without it, the mind cannot rest. Without it, peace becomes impossible, not because peace is far away, but because there is nowhere for it to land. An undisciplined life pulls you in many directions, but never deeply into one. You are everywhere, yet nowhere fully. And the longer this continues, the harder it becomes to hear your own inner voice. Not because it has disappeared, but because it has been drowned out. There is a moment many people recognize, though few speak about it. You are sitting alone, perhaps late at night, and a strange question arises uninvited. How did my life start to feel like this? Not in anger, not in despair, just quiet confusion. This is the moment discipline becomes relevant, not as a solution, but as an awakening. Because discipline, at its core, is what restores direction to effort. It asks you to look closely at how you are spending your days, not with judgment, but with curiosity. Where does your energy actually go? What do you consistently feed with your time and attention? And what does that feeding create inside you? An undisciplined life is not immoral. It is simply unconscious. And consciousness changes everything. When discipline begins to form not as force, but as clarity, you feel it immediately. There is less internal noise, less negotiation, less regret at the end of the day. Not because life has become easier, but because it has become more honest. The quiet cost of an undisciplined life is the gradual loss of presence. The quiet gift of discipline is its return. And once you taste that return even briefly, you understand something essential: peace was never missing. It was being crowded out. Discipline doesn't add something new to your life. It removes what was never meant to be there. And in that removal, something deeply human begins to breathe again. Peace is one of the most misunderstood words in modern life. Most people imagine it as a destination, a moment somewhere in the future, when everything finally settles. When the right amount of money is earned. When the right relationship is secured. When the calendar opens up and the mind no longer feels chased. But peace does not arrive that way. It never has. Peace is not something you stumble upon after fixing your life. It is something you cultivate while your life is still unfinished. This is where many people quietly give up, not because peace is impossible, but because they are looking for it in the wrong place. They wait for silence before learning how to listen. They wait for stability before learning how to stay grounded. They wait for fewer problems before learning how to be present. The Buddha taught something far more radical: peace does not come from the absence of disturbance. It comes from a different relationship to disturbance. You can feel this truth when you stop long enough to notice your own patterns. Even on calm days, the mind searches for tension. Even when nothing is wrong, it rehearses what could be. Even in moments of comfort, it plans the next escape. This restlessness is not a flaw. It is conditioning. The mind has been trained to scan, evaluate, anticipate, to protect, to control. And so peace feels unfamiliar not because it is rare, but because we don't know how to stay with it when it appears. The moment things soften, the mind moves again. This is why peace must be practiced. Not as a belief, not as an ideal, but as a daily discipline of attention. Peace begins the moment you stop demanding that your experience be different than it is. That does not mean resignation. It means honesty. It means noticing the subtle ways you resist life, how you tense against inconvenience, how you rush past discomfort, how you mentally argue with reality instead of meeting it. Every act of resistance creates friction. Every moment of friction disturbs the mind. Peace is what emerges when that friction eases. This is why the Buddha pointed people back to the simplest place possible, the breath. Not because the breath is magical, but because it is honest. The breath does not ask for improvement. It does not rush. It does not hold on. It comes. It goes. When you rest your attention there, even briefly, something recalibrates. The nervous system recognizes safety. The mind steps out of urgency. The body remembers a rhythm older than fear. Peace begins as a physical sensation before it becomes a philosophy. A softening of the shoulders. A slowing of the inner monologue. A moment where you realize you are not being chased. This is not escape. It is return. And from this return, clarity grows. You begin to see how much energy you spend trying to outrun discomfort. How often you confuse stimulation with aliveness. How rarely you allow yourself to simply be where you are without reaching for the next distraction. Peace challenges all of that. It asks you to stay. To stay with a moment that is incomplete. To stay with a feeling that has no solution yet. To stay with life as it unfolds rather than forcing it into shape. This is why peace can feel threatening at first. It removes the familiar noise. It exposes the habits of avoidance. But if you remain, something deeper reveals itself. Peace is not fragile. It does not shatter when life becomes difficult. It deepens. Because peace is not built on conditions. It is built on capacity, the capacity to remain present without collapsing into reaction. This is why disciplined attention matters so much. Without it, peace has no roots. With it, peace becomes resilient. You begin to notice moments you once overlooked. The quiet satisfaction of completing something with care. The stillness between tasks. The steadiness that appears when you respond instead of react. These moments are not dramatic. They are not shareable. But they change everything. Peace, cultivated this way, does not make you passive. It makes you precise. You act with less force and more clarity. You speak with less urgency and more truth. You stop fighting what is already happening and begin working with it. And slowly, the constant sense of struggle loosens. Not because challenges disappear, but because you are no longer at war with them. This is the peace the Buddha pointed toward. Not a withdrawal from life, but a way of inhabiting it fully. Peace that breathes. Peace that moves. Peace that holds steady even when circumstances do not. It is not something you earn at the end of the journey. It is something you practice at the beginning of every moment. And once you begin cultivating it gently, consistently, you realize something quietly profound. Peace was never missing from your life. It was waiting for you to stop long enough to receive it. Most people spend their lives trying to outrun their challenges. They call them obstacles, problems, setbacks, enemies standing between them and the life they believe they're supposed to have. So they resist. They strategize endlessly. They ask, how do I get past this? Instead of, what is this asking of me? But life does not place challenges in our path to punish us. It places them there to reveal us. The Buddha never taught that suffering could be avoided by arranging life perfectly. He taught that suffering arises from how we relate to what inevitably appears. And few things expose that relationship more clearly than difficulty. Challenges do not interrupt the path. They are the path. This is not easy to accept, especially in a culture that equates success with smoothness and progress with comfort. We are trained to believe that if something is hard, something has gone wrong. That friction means failure. That struggle is a sign we chose incorrectly. But look closely at your own life. The moments that shaped you most were not the easy ones. They were the moments that demanded something from you when you didn't feel ready. The loss that forced you to slow down. The failure that stripped away illusions. The period of uncertainty that taught you how little control you truly have. These moments did not feel like gifts at the time. They felt like interruptions, like betrayals. Yet they carried a kind of intelligence that comfort never brings. Challenges have a way of cutting through pretense. They expose where we cling, where we avoid, where we demand certainty in a world that offers none. They show us the habits we rely on when things don't go our way. This is why the Buddha spoke of suffering not as something to fear, but as something to understand. When difficulty arises, there are two responses available. The first is resistance. You tighten. You argue with reality. You tell yourself stories about how things should not be this way. This resistance adds a second layer of pain. Not the pain of the challenge itself, but the pain of fighting it, the pain of self-blame, the pain of fear. The second response is attention, not passive acceptance, not resignation, but presence. Attention asks a different question. Not how do I make this stop, but what is being revealed here. When you meet a challenge with attention rather than resistance, its nature changes. It no longer feels like an attack. It becomes information. You begin to see where your expectations were rigid, where your identity was fragile, where your sense of control was illusory. This seeing is not comfortable, but it is liberating. Because many of the things we call obstacles are actually mirrors. They reflect back the places in us that have never been examined. The challenge itself may be unavoidable. The suffering layered on top of it is not. This is why the Buddha taught the middle way, not avoiding pain, not indulging despair, but meeting life exactly as it is, without the added violence of resistance. Think of how often challenges are framed as detours. I can't begin until this is resolved. I'll be at peace once this passes. Everything would be fine if this weren't happening. But life does not pause while you wait for ideal conditions. It continues, quietly asking for your participation. Challenges are invitations to maturity. They ask you to respond rather than react, to choose awareness over habit, to meet uncertainty without collapsing into fear. This is where discipline and peace converge, not in the absence of difficulty, but in the ability to remain steady within it. A disciplined mind does not eliminate challenges. It prevents you from turning them into identities. You are not your failure. You are not your struggle. You are not defined by what didn't work. You are the awareness that can stay present without being consumed. When challenges are met this way, something remarkable happens. They lose their power to define you. They no longer feel like verdicts on your worth or signs that you are off course. They become teachers, not gentle teachers, not comforting ones, but honest ones. They teach you where to soften, where to let go, where to stop demanding that life conform to your expectations. And over time, a quiet confidence develops. Not the confidence that everything will work out the way you want, but the confidence that whatever arises, you can meet it without abandoning yourself. This is the kind of strength the Buddha pointed toward. Not dominance over life, but intimacy with it. Challenges will continue to appear. This is not a failure of practice. It is confirmation that you are alive. The question is no longer whether difficulty will arise. It is how you will stand when it does. And when you stop treating challenges as enemies, you discover something deeply human. Life was never trying to break you. It was trying to wake you up. Fear has a strange way of convincing us that it is protecting us. It speaks in urgent tones. It tells convincing stories. It insists that if we don't think ahead, plan obsessively, or brace ourselves for what might go wrong, something terrible will happen. And so we listen. We replay conversations that haven't happened yet. We rehearse losses we haven't experienced. We suffer through futures that may never arrive. This is how fear survives, not in the present moment, but in imagined tomorrows. If you look closely, fear is rarely about what is happening right now. Right now you are breathing. Right now you are alive. Right now the ground beneath you is holding. Fear lives just a few steps ahead of that. It lives in what if, in what happens next, in the mind's endless attempt to control an uncertain world. The Buddha taught that much of our suffering is not caused by life itself, but by the stories the mind creates about life. Fear is one of the most persuasive of those stories. It tells you that anxiety equals responsibility, that worry equals preparation, that vigilance equals strength. But if that were true, wouldn't all this worrying have made us peaceful by now? Instead, fear drains us. It keeps the body tense even when no danger is present. It exhausts the mind with scenarios that never resolve. It steals attention from the only place where life is actually happening. Tonight, somewhere in Chicago, someone lies awake in the dark. Nothing is happening in the room. The house is quiet. The body is safe. And yet the mind is racing: job security, relationships, health, the future. Fear is working overtime, trying to solve tomorrow before it arrives. This is not wisdom. It is mental proliferation. One thought gives birth to another. One imagined problem multiplies into 10. And soon, the mind is living in a world entirely of its own creation. The Buddha did not teach that fear must be eliminated. He taught that it must be understood. Fear arises when the mind leaves the present moment and forgets where it is. It confuses possibility with reality. It treats imagination as evidence. Peace, on the other hand, does not argue with the future. It returns to now. Not as a spiritual trick, but as an act of sanity. When you come back to the present, even briefly, you notice something profound. The fear softens. Not because the future is suddenly guaranteed, but because the future is no longer being lived prematurely. Right now, nothing is demanding your panic. This does not mean ignoring real problems. It means refusing to suffer twice. The Buddha spoke of the second arrow, the suffering we add through resistance, fear, and mental storytelling. The first arrow may be unavoidable. Life brings change, loss, uncertainty. But the second arrow is optional. Fear is often that second arrow. It is the tension layered on top of uncertainty, the collapse layered on top of challenge, the story layered on top of reality. When fear arises, discipline does not mean suppressing it. It means not feeding it. You notice the fear. You feel it in the body. You recognize the story forming. And instead of chasing it into the future, you return to what is real. The breath, the sensation of your feet on the floor, the fact that, in this moment, you are still here. This return is not denial. It is grounding. Over time, something shifts. You realize that fear loses its authority when it is seen clearly. It cannot command you if you stop believing every word it says. It cannot dominate when it is met with calm attention rather than urgency. This is how peace grows, not by removing fear, but by changing your relationship to it. Fear may still visit. It may still whisper. But it no longer runs your life. You begin to live where peace lives here, now, in the present moment, while allowing the future to unfold without being consumed by it. And in that space, a quiet freedom appears. Not the freedom of certainty, but the freedom of not needing it. Peace does not promise that nothing will go wrong tomorrow. It reminds you that you don't have to abandon yourself today. Fear lives in tomorrow. But your life, your breath, your strength, your capacity to respond lives here. And when you learn to return here again and again, fear begins to lose its grip. Not because it disappears, but because you no longer follow it into the dark. Letting go is one of the most feared ideas in human life. Not because we don't understand it intellectually, but because we misunderstand what it asks of us. Most people hear letting go and imagine loss, abandonment, giving up something precious and never getting it back. So they resist it instinctively. They hold tighter to relationships, to identities, to timelines, to versions of themselves that once made sense but no longer fit. They tell themselves that holding on is strength, that persistence means loyalty, that releasing something is the same as admitting defeat. But the Buddha never taught letting go as disappearance. He taught it as right relationship. Letting go is not about erasing your life. It is about changing how you hold it. Look closely at what we cling to. We cling to who we thought we would be by now. We cling to stories about how life should unfold. We cling to pain, not because we enjoy it, but because it has become familiar. Sometimes we even cling to suffering because it gives shape to our identity. It explains our reactions. It justifies our fear. It becomes a story we know how to tell. This is why letting go feels terrifying. Not because it takes something away, but because it threatens the narrative that has been organizing our inner world. Letting go asks a deeper question: who are you without the story you keep repeating? The Buddha taught that letting go has layers. The first is willingness, the quiet honesty to admit, I cannot keep living this way. Many people reach this stage. They feel it late at night, or during moments of stillness, or when exhaustion strips away pretense. They recognize that something must change, but willingness alone is not enough. The second layer is capacity, and this is where most people struggle. You may want to let go of resentment, but still feel it tighten your chest. You may want to let go of fear, but still feel it grip your thoughts. You may want to let go of an identity, but still rely on it to feel safe. This does not mean you are failing. It means you are human. Letting go is not a single act of release. It is a practice of loosening. You loosen your grip one moment at a time. You notice when the mind clenches. You feel the urge to control, to defend, to hold on. And instead of forcing release, you soften around it. This is where compassion matters. Without compassion, letting go becomes violent. You try to rip things away before understanding why they were held in the first place. But every attachment once served a purpose. Every defense once protected something tender. Every pattern once helped you survive. Letting go does not dishonor that history. It thanks it and then chooses differently. There is a quiet wisdom in realizing that you do not have to drop everything at once. That some things fall away naturally when they are no longer fed. That time, awareness and gentleness accomplish what force never could. Think of autumn in Vermont, when the leaves change color and release themselves from the branches. The tree does not push them away. The leaves do not cling in desperation. The release happens when the conditions are right. Letting go works the same way. You stop feeding the story. You stop rehearsing the pain. You stop defining yourself by what happened, what failed, or what was lost. And slowly, the grip weakens. Not because you forced it, but because you no longer needed it. This is the part most people miss. Letting go does not make you empty. It makes space. Space for new ways of being. Space for responses that are not dictated by old wounds. Space for a self that is no longer built entirely out of defense. You do not lose yourself in letting go. You find what was buried beneath what you were holding. The fear says, if I let go, I will fall apart. Experience says, if I let go, I can finally breathe. And in that breath, something steady emerges. Not a new identity, not a perfected version of yourself, but a simpler presence, less burdened, less reactive, more alive. The Buddha taught that clinging is exhausting because it asks the impossible. It asks impermanent things to provide permanent security. It asks changing conditions to define who we are. Letting go is the moment you stop making that demand. You still care, you still love, you still commit, but you no longer imprison yourself inside what you cannot control. This is not weakness. It is maturity. It is the strength to stand without gripping, to love without possession, to live without insisting that life stay the same. And when you begin to let go in this way, not all at once, not dramatically, but honestly, you discover something unexpected. What remains is not emptiness. What remains is peace that does not depend on what you're holding. There is a version of strength that the world celebrates loudly. It is visible, impressive, often intimidating. It conquers, competes, dominates. It proves itself through victory, recognition, and control. But there is another kind of strength, quieter, less dramatic, and far more enduring. It does not need an opponent. It does not need applause. And it does not collapse when no one is watching. This is the strength the Buddha spoke of. Not the strength of overpowering life, but the strength of standing in alignment with it. Most people believe strength is built by pushing harder, by forcing themselves forward through willpower alone, by ignoring fatigue, doubt, and vulnerability until something breaks. But this kind of strength is brittle. It depends on conditions going your way. It needs constant reinforcement. When circumstances shift, as they always do, it falters. The Buddha taught a different foundation, entirely ethical integrity. At first, this idea sounds ordinary, even unremarkable. But integrity is one of the most demanding forms of strength there is. It means choosing not to harm, even when harm would be easier. It means speaking truthfully, even when silence or distortion would protect your image. It means honoring commitments, not because you fear consequences, but because your word matters to you. This kind of strength does not announce itself. It is felt inwardly. When your actions are aligned, your mind rests differently. There is less fear of being exposed, less anxiety about what might come back to haunt you, less internal conflict pulling you in opposite directions. Integrity simplifies the mind. And from that simplicity, strength grows. This is why the Buddha placed ethical conduct at the foundation of the path. Not as moral policing, but as inner stabilization. When you stop acting against yourself, you stop leaking energy. Consider how much effort is required to live without integrity. You must remember what you said to whom. You must manage impressions. You must justify choices you secretly know were misaligned. This constant self-management is exhausting. True strength removes that burden. You can look people in the eye without flinching. You can sit alone without distraction. You can sleep without replaying the day in quiet regret. This is not rigidity. It is grounding. And it creates a kind of courage that does not need to be tested. The world often mistakes aggression for confidence. But aggression is usually fear wearing armor. Real strength does not need armor. It does not react immediately. It does not escalate unnecessarily. It does not need to win every exchange. It chooses its responses deliberately. This strength becomes especially visible in moments of temptation. When shortcuts appear. When compromise whispers. When no one would know if you bent the truth just a little. These are not small moments. They are the training ground of character. Every time you choose alignment over convenience, something inside you steadies. Every time you refuse to act from impulse, you strengthen a deeper muscle. Every time you honor your values quietly, without reward, your life becomes more coherent. This is the strength that cannot be shaken by criticism or praise. Because it is not built on approval. It is built on self-trust. And self-trust changes everything. You no longer need to posture. You no longer need to dominate. You no longer need to prove that you are strong. You know it. The Buddha said that conquering oneself is greater than conquering 1,000 enemies. not because the inner work is more glamorous, but because it is more real. The battles that shape your life are not fought in public. They are fought in moments of choice, often small, often unseen. Do I act from fear or from clarity? Do I protect my ego or my integrity? Do I reach for control or remain grounded? Each answer builds a different kind of strength, and over time, a quiet power emerges. Not the power to bend the world to your will, but the power to meet the world without losing yourself. This strength does not require opposition to exist. It does not depend on someone else being wrong. It does not collapse when circumstances turn. It is steady. It is rooted. It is free. And in a world addicted to force, this kind of strength is revolutionary. Life does not slow down when you find your footing. If anything, it speeds up. Praise and criticism arrive without warning. Gain follows loss. Moments of clarity are quickly replaced by uncertainty. The world moves, shifts, demands, and it does not wait for you to feel ready. This is why equanimity matters, not as emotional numbness, not as indifference, but as the ability to remain centered while everything else moves. Most people believe they are stable until life tests them, until a comment cuts deeper than expected, until recognition inflates the ego, until comparison quietly poisons contentment. The Buddha spoke of the winds that move through every human life, forces so ordinary we rarely name them, yet so powerful they shape entire destinies. Praise and blame, gain and loss, pleasure and pain, status and obscurity. These winds do not discriminate. They touch everyone. What differs is not who experiences them, but who is carried away by them. Without equanimity, the mind becomes reactive. Praise lifts you too high. Criticism pulls you too low. Success creates attachment. Loss feels like erasure. Your sense of self rises and falls with circumstances, leaving you exhausted and unsteady. Equanimity does not stop the winds. It stops the spinning. It allows you to feel without being thrown, to care without clinging, to engage without losing your center. This is not detachment from life. It is depth within it. You begin to notice how much of your emotional turbulence comes not from events themselves, but from how quickly the mind leans toward or away from them. How instantly it grasps at pleasure and resists discomfort. How often it demands that reality be different. Equanimity is the discipline of returning to balance. Again and again. Not forcefully, not rigidly, but gently, with awareness. The Buddha pointed to the breath for a reason. Not as an escape, but as an anchor. The breath does not praise you. It does not blame you. It does not compare you to anyone else. It simply moves, steady and neutral, moment by moment. When the mind is blown outward by the winds of life, the breath is where you come home. In a world saturated with stimulation, this return is radical. You scroll, and the mind tilts toward envy. You receive feedback, and the chest tightens. You achieve something, and suddenly fear of losing it appears. Each time, you have a choice. You can follow the movement outward into reaction, into story, into identification. Or you can pause, feel the breath, and return to center. This return is not passive, it is trained. Equanimity is built through thousands of small moments of noticing when the mind is pulled off balance and choosing not to go with it. It is developed through patience, repetition, and honesty. At first, the mind resists. It wants drama. It wants certainty. It wants to be right. But over time, something shifts. You begin to recognize the familiar patterns without being consumed by them. You notice emotional waves without drowning in them. You allow experiences to arise and pass without gripping. This does not make life dull. It makes it clear. Pleasure is enjoyed more fully because it is not clung to. Pain is felt honestly without being magnified. Praise is received without inflation. Criticism is heard without collapse. You stop building your identity out of conditions that cannot last. And in that stopping, a deeper stability emerges. Like the ocean beneath the waves, there is a depth that remains untouched by surface movement. Storms may rage above, but below there is stillness. Equanimity is finding that depth within yourself, not by escaping the surface, but by knowing you are more than it. The world will continue to move. Opinions will shift. Circumstances will change. Equanimity does not promise control over any of this. It offers something far more valuable. It offers a place to stand, a center that does not depend on approval or outcome, a steadiness that allows you to meet life as it is, without being broken by it. And once you know that center, once you learn how to return to it, you are no longer afraid of movement. You are no longer thrown by the winds. You remain here, breathing, present, unshaken. This is not the end of struggle. It is the end of being lost within it. The new year does not arrive with a clean slate. That idea is comforting, but it is not true. Nothing truly resets. Nothing erases what has been lived, learned, endured, or avoided. Life does not pause, rewind, or offer you a brand new self untouched by the past. And this is not a failure. It is an invitation. The Buddha never spoke of transformation as a dramatic rupture. He spoke of continuation of walking forward with clearer seeing, steadier intention, and deeper honesty than before. The new year is not a moment to abandon who you have been. It is a moment to stop running from them. So many people approach January with quiet violence toward themselves. They speak of starting over, as if the person who struggled last year must be discarded, as if discipline means rejecting your humanity, as if peace requires becoming someone else entirely. But nothing grows that way. Growth happens when continuity is honored. You do not need a new personality. You do not need a perfect routine. You do not need to overhaul your life in a single decisive act. What you need is direction rooted in awareness. The Buddha taught that everything begins with intention, not intention as ambition, but intention as orientation. The subtle direction of the heart that shapes every choice long before action appears. Each moment, quietly, ask the same question: what am I strengthening right now? Not tomorrow, not next month. Now. Every small choice feeds something. Every repeated action becomes a pattern. Every pattern becomes a way of being. This is why the path is never built in grand gestures. It is built in ordinary moments, often the ones no one sees. The moment you rise when you said you would. The moment you pause before reacting. The moment you choose honesty over ease. The moment you sit still for 5 minutes instead of reaching for distraction. These moments do not feel heroic, but they are decisive. They create momentum that does not depend on motivation. They build discipline that does not rely on force. They cultivate peace that does not disappear when life becomes difficult. This is what the Buddha meant by walking the path. Not racing ahead. Not judging yourself for falling behind, but continuing again and again with right intention. You will not walk perfectly. You will forget. You will drift. You will have days when everything you've heard feels distant. That is not failure. That is practice. The path does not require constant inspiration. It requires return. Return to the breath. Return to the present moment. Return to the simple question of how to meet what is in front of you without causing more suffering. Discipline, peace, and wisdom do not appear all at once. They grow together, each supporting the other, through consistency rather than intensity. Discipline creates the container. Peace softens the struggle inside it. Wisdom emerges naturally when the mind is no longer at war with itself. This is not a life free of challenges. It is a life no longer defined by them. As this year unfolds, you will not always know where it is leading. That uncertainty does not mean you are lost. It means you are alive. You do not need to see the entire path. You only need to see the next step clearly enough to take it. And that step is rarely dramatic. It might be 5 quiet minutes in the morning, one honest boundary, one moment of restraint, one breath taken consciously when fear tries to rush you forward. The Buddha said the path is walked step by step, moment by moment, not by becoming someone new, but by shedding what was never truly you. So do not ask this year to transform you. Ask it to teach you how to remain present as you are. Ask it to help you choose clarity over confusion, alignment over force, awareness over avoidance. The new year is not a reset. It is a continuation, and this time, you are walking with your eyes open. As this journey comes to a close, what remains is not a list of techniques or a set of rules to follow, but a deeper understanding of how life actually unfolds. This story was never about escaping difficulty, fixing yourself, or becoming someone else in the new year. It was about learning how to live with clarity inside a world that constantly pulls you in every direction. We explored how discipline is not punishment, but protection, how it creates a container where the mind can finally rest. We saw that peace is not something you find once everything is resolved, but something you cultivate in the middle of uncertainty, stress, and unfinished business. We learned that life's challenges are not enemies blocking the path, but teachers revealing where we cling, resist, or lose ourselves. We looked closely at fear and discovered that it lives almost entirely in imagined tomorrows, while peace has always been waiting in the present moment. We confronted the fear of letting go and realized that release is not loss, but the creation of space for something truer to emerge. We redefined strength as integrity rather than dominance, steadiness rather than force. And finally, we arrived at equanimity, the quiet center that allows us to remain grounded while everything else changes. Taken together, these teachings point to one essential truth: suffering does not come from life being difficult, it comes from fighting life as it is. When we stop demanding that reality conform to our expectations, something softens. When we learn to pause instead of react, to notice instead of judge, to return instead of escape, life begins to feel less like a battle and more like a conversation.